Hi, I'm back. It's Jonathan at the piano lesson. I thought we'd talk about one of the three B's today. What are the three B's? Well, there's Bach, and there's Beethoven, and then the third B, it depends on who you talk to. Could be Brahms, could be Berlioz. But we're going to deal with number one, the number one B, the number one B, the number A, the letter A, B, Bach. Um, Beethoven, the other B, called Bach the father. And even Chopin said he was the father of modern harmony. And the other day, I was feeling kind of stiff, and I really haven't touched any Bach in quite a while. I used to play it all the time before COVID, and I had a full-time studio, and I was teaching all the time, and I did a lot of classical music. I've actually played a lot of classical music in my life, even though I talk about jazz all the time. It just seemed like my nature kind of led me that way, luck and nature. But I played a lot of classical music. I've studied a lot of classical music. And, it's pretty hard to play the piano and not play any classical music, or for that matter, play any instrument, because it's just such great music. And Bach is something that's nice to play every day. There's a few simple pieces I want to share with you, and they're deceptively simple, as all deceptively simple pieces are. But I'll show you why I think they're important, and why they help to make us good musicians and help our technique and keep us, in shape, musically. So let's just look at this piece here. This is, you might have heard of this piece. This is a prelude from the well-tempered clavichord, with the prelude number 1 in C. And let me just share with you for a moment here. I'm not a big computer graphics guy. Sorry about that. But there we go. You can see there's a big, go over here. There's a big rest right there. It's actually a small rest, but it's an important rest. Very typical for Bach, where the musical line starts with silence. Now, yes, there's a note on count 1 that's in the bass. That's a bass note. It's not really the beginning of the melody, although, in Baroque music, very often we don't have the same types of melodies that we have in Mozart and Beethoven. That is kind of comes under the big umbrella of homophonic music. This is polyphonic music. So there are like fragments of melodies that are kind of interweaved together and dovetail into one another, and it's almost like a camera lens that kind of goes in and out of focus, whereas a classical piece of music has a melody that's very distinctive, and there's an underlying accompaniment that's very subordinate to the melody. And I wrote this here the other day because I was having some trouble with one of my online students. We were having a little glitch in our communication. Anyway, I wanted to point that out because it's very typical of Bach, and I'm stuttering here. There are some very fundamental questions that one has to ask when you're playing music. And one of those questions is, what is the shape of the melodic line? So where does it begin, where does it end, and why? And how do you get it across? And there are components to that shape. So there are rhythmic components. There is a rhythmic shape. And then there is a dynamic shape, right? In other words, how do the dynamics convey the musical phrase? For instance, starting loud and getting softer can imply a musical phrase. There are actually, it's probably good to review this. I've talked about this before, but there are really 5 elements of musicianship, or so we have the I think I could write that better. What do you think? We have the rhythmic shape, right? We have the dynamic shape. We have the pedaling, which is pretty important in terms of a piano piece. And we have the balance between the lines, and there is a, well, we'll call it a, I'm going to erase that for a second. We're going to have the dynamic balance. So in other words, the balance between the counterpoint, between the lines, and the overall, kind of the overall shape of the piece. We have a high point and a low point, right? So we need to take the piece in its entirety as well. We need to understand the piece in its entirety. I may decide to rewrite those later and modify them. But here's the music, okay? And it's in C, and it starts like this. And I'm going to play it very slowly. I'm going to start with the pedal down. And I'm playing in a very kind of one-dimensional way. I'm using the same dynamic for everything. And I'm doing that deliberately. And each time I change the measure, I'm pedaling. But I'm pedaling actually after the rest, after the 16th rest, because that's really where the chord changes and where the dissonance begins. Pedal, pedal, pedal. I'm not pedaling on the count 1 as one would think. I want that connection to go over the bar line, pedal, because it had the same bass note in the previous measure. Pedal. Now here I pedaled, I changed my rule because the bass changed. Pedal. And if you were to identify a melody, it's that tenor voice in the left hand. You have to excuse the E on my piano, which is kind of stuck. I have to have my technician out here, which I haven't had in a while. Now I'm going to start bringing out one of those lines. So now I have 2 dynamics. The up stem. And the focus of that line kind of ends up changing. See, it went over the bar line. Pedal. Bass changes. And that tenor line really is no longer as viable, perhaps. If I go back to this single dynamic, G7, C in second inversion, got a big juicy chord here. C, second version. Strange because he has the fifth in the left hand. Resolves. And the ending. Sorry, guys. That's the right note. So there's your prelude. And you could go through and block out the chords. You know, you could just that's one strategy to practice it. So you might not want to play 16ths all the way through that. You could go, but 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E, and you could accent 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. Just to try to get those in your fingers. Another thing you could do is just go back and forth between two notes. This is the kind of practicing that you have to do really to get this music in your fingers. You could even do double time. And it allows you to absorb the music, digest it, get used to playing fast between two notes, develop those muscles. And then you could snip out the long notes. Now here I'm kind of using a little bit of forearm. You could also play with very kind of higher fingers if you want, and kind of toss your fingers into the key to kind of tossing your fingers into the key, even stretching your fingers against the fall board, and kind of, learning to develop some independence. And when you're tossing those fingers, I'm really exaggerating, like that. So we're talking about the shapes, the dynamic shapes. Where does the melody begin and end? You have this lower line here. It's probably too hard to see, but you can see there's. Let me just bring it up again here to illustrate my point. Okay, so you have I've seen people really don't understand how to read piano music, okay? But when you read piano music, you're going to see stem directions. And there are general rules for stem directions. So typically, if a note, on a staff, right, you have 5 lines on the staff. It doesn't really matter if you have a clef or not. It's unimportant. But if you have a note that's below the 3rd line, you write the note head either on a line or a space, and the stem is going to go up on the right. If you have a note that's on the middle line or above, that's going to go down on the left. That's just a general rule. Why do they do that? To kind of keep the notes on the staff, to kind of just, it's good. But those rules get broken when you're trying to communicate something else. So what is that something else? Well, the something else is the counterpoint. The something else are the contrasting lines. So in this piece of music, you have the first note, which is over here. the bass, and that stem's going down. Then you have another note in that's the tenor voice, and that's going up. And I'm just giving these names just to distinguish them. You know, I mean, they're in the same register, so you know, whether I call them tenor or bass, but for our purposes, that line's going up. That's a separate melodic line, and you can practice that independently. And then you have these kind of broken chords up here, and you could very well interpret, you could impute either an alto or a soprano line in there, depending on your imagination. And you do that through dynamics, okay, and you kind of use your ear, right? But the first line is, and that's a very good way to practice, just bringing that out. Really, so you know, the first line is very simple. It's just that. That's really all it is. Then you have the up stem, right? That's the E. And I'm skipping ahead. So those are the two ideas. You have this and you have this, right? And sometimes you have that, and sometimes you have that, and sometimes you have this, and sometimes it goes back to that, right? You have essentially, you know, 1 5 1. This is kind of a suspension. It's kind of an I call it an upside down suspension. It's D minor. It's a D minor 7 chord, right? It's a 2 5 1 is really what it is. It's 1 2 D minor. That's in third inversion with the D in the bass. 5 G7 1. Right. So 2 5 1 is not just jazz, right? And this could very well have been a 4 chord. There are common tones. The 4 chord would be F. C is a common tone. A is a common tone. F is a common tone. Bach could have just written. He could have done this and done this, right? He could have done that. But this is far more subtle and more beautiful and more complex, and it retains this voice, this beautiful voice. Then you have in the right hand, right, that triad. Well, the melodic line beginning on the second quarter of count 1, the E, could end there, could end here. That makes a little more sense to me. So the first idea is this. The second idea is this. And the third idea perhaps going over the bar line. Dee da da dum. I call it a musical slinky. So if you see the little kids toy with the slinky, the metal spring that my favorite game was to. I saw some kids with that the other day. I said, "Do you know the game where you go down the stairs?" They're like, "No, we haven't done that." And I said, "Oh man, I think I saw them at the library." And I told their mom, "You gotta show them the slinky trick down the stairs, but you take the slinky and it goes down, down, down. It's kind of like this self-licking lollipop, all right?" And that's kind of what these pieces are. They just sort of wind up and they play themselves. And it helps if you can flesh out another dimension to them, another dynamic to them. So, let's divide that into 2 parts. I'm just doing some creative stuff now, okay? This is the jazz part of the classical lesson. So the first fingering you could have is perhaps this. And then you could take your left hand, play the same notes, and cross. You know, now why would you want to do that? Well, it sounds different. The timing changes. It gets it into your brain a little differently. It doesn't sound quite so mechanical, so monotonous, and it can elicit interpretations that you might not ordinarily have arrived at had you just stuck to the same fingers. Now, yeah, I mean, these pieces, you know, I mean, music is hard to play, right? So we don't do that in the very beginning. Although, I don't know, you could do that in the beginning. It might even be easier, really. I just kind of think that we tend to do these kind of simplistic things where we repeat the same fingers over and over again, and what we're doing naively is we're kind of building in a very brittle way of playing and way of thinking of the piece, so that, God forbid, you know, in the middle of the performance you might get nervous or you might forget something and the whole thing sort of falls apart. In this way, it's organic. It's like, you know, you have to really practice the piece as if you wrote it. So in this instance, it's almost like juggling balls. You start with 2 and 3 and 4. Now, I don't juggle, but I'm just, you know, using an analogy. So for you jugglers out there, that's what it's an analogy. Okay, so doing that. Now, I like bringing out this voice here. I mean, there's the melody. Not much of a melody, but at least it kind of gives you a focal point. You know, otherwise it just sounds like a little music box. It just sounds like... You could play it in different parts of the piano also to experience it in different parts of the piano. You play it down here, right? Change octaves. Just to have some fun with it, you know. Just have some fun with it. It can get boring practicing, so you have to do things that, you know, help your creativity and help you motivate yourself. I think of the second half as an echo. So I start out louder and play the second one softer, almost like paddling in a canoe. So you have and then matching as that dynamic recedes, I play the second one at the same volume that the previous line ended at. So they don't. So one sounds like, the second one sounds like it's a result of the first one. And also sometimes I just like different fingerings. I like the way they feel in my hand. If I want to bring out something, bring out a certain voice. I sort of like that. This timing is different. Second time. Huh. Now, I might not, actually in performance, I might not do that, but at least it gets that timing in my ear. So I might be using the same fingers, but I have that intention in my playing. I could also encompass all of those notes in one hand. That's a little bit hard to reach. probably wouldn't want to reach that. So that's not particularly practical. Here's another way to do it. Take 3 notes in the left hand, and then that. 3 notes in the left hand. 3 notes in the left hand. Do you hear how that, I'm in effect pedaling with my fingers, and you hear how it changes the whole intention of the piece? It's like kind of like one grouping of notes. And I kind of arrive at that with some experimentation. I sort of like that. Now, at some point in the piece, I might change that. Instead of 3 notes, groupings of 3 notes, I might, in this instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I can change from groupings of 3 to groupings of 5. Back to 3. The writing forces me to do that. By the way, look what Bach does here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the 8th measure, which is typically the end of a phrase. Rather than resolving on the tonic on count 1, he resolves on just after count 1 on the 2nd quarter of that beat. That little thing there is just so incredibly brilliant, you know. And then he goes to the relative minor. Does he go to relative minor? Yeah, he does. It's A minor 7. It doesn't quite sound like the relative minor because it's a minor 7. It's not this. It's not that. A lesser composer would have done that. He does minor 7. And then 2, 5, 1. There's your 2, 5, 1. You know, A minor 7, D7, G. Okay, and then he kind of changes key over here. Now this is a lot of notes. We're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to have to cut this a little bit short here, unfortunately. But this is sort of how I practice. This is what kind of goes on in, you know, in my little brain. And I hope that was helpful. And other than that, I have no opinion. So, pleasure as always. Big shout out to my buddy Francesco out there in sunny Italy. And we'll keep posting those comments and writing. And appreciate everyone watching. And we'll see you next time. This is Jonathan at The Piano Lesson. You can visit me at thepianolesson.com for more information. Bye-bye.